What do innovation professionals actually do? And how do they do it? How do designers create new products, services, strategies and systems? And how do they overcome barriers to make change happen? Welcome to Idea Work, the podcast about the people, skills and mindsets behind innovation. I'm Michael Walter, and I'm glad you've joined me. Whether you're starting out in innovation, shifting careers, or just curious, you're in the right place. Let's discover what makes ideas work. Hello everyone. So, we are now at the develop phase of the Double Diamond. We've done our research, defined our research, we've got a how might we question, and now we want to finally try and come up with some creative solutions. So at the end of the last episode, the question we came to was, how might we support university staff to better market and advertise health solutions to international students so they can more confidently access them? So this is what was great about the Double Diamond. Initially, we thought the problem space and the person we were designing for was the international students. But by doing research, realized that actually in this hypothetical situation, the international students are quite comfortable with medical facilities. They just don't know how to access them at the university. So the problem actually lies, the problem holder is the university, not the international students. And as a result of this, we pivoted to make our solution about supporting the university, and the persona and the problem owner was the university, not the international students. So now that we've clearly defined this how might we question, I'll read it one more time. How might we support university staff to better market and advertise health services to international students so they can more confidently access them? You might write this on a whiteboard, or you might make this somewhere that's very clear and visual, and so everyone can understand what is the specific problem they're trying to solve. And then you set the scene for creativity. It's not about just jumping in and you need a typical board meeting where everyone's like, what ideas do you have? And people might say, how about we do this? And then that person would be like, nah, bad idea, was another idea. And then somebody else pitches an idea and they get critiqued. That's a terrible, terrible way to do ideation, because one, it stifles the creativity. Two, people don't feel safe. And three, it just gives the person saying no a big ego. They can just critique, they don't have to be creative. It's much easier to cut down than it is to build. It's just a terrible way to do ideation. So one way to start is you could do a little icebreaker. So you want to start making a psychologically safe environment. So this means no judgment, all ideas are welcome, even the wild ones, and encourage contributions from quiet voices. One icebreaker you could do is called the squiggly birds. This is just a simple, silly icebreaker. You can put some nice music on and get everyone to just draw a bunch of squiggles on some paper. After they've filled their page with squiggles, then you say, let's make these into birds. And this is quite simple. You just put eyes on each squiggle, like a little dot. You put a little beak, and then you put some wings, and all of a sudden, all those squiggles actually start to look like birds. It's a simple activity, but it reminds everyone that most ideas, even if they seem to be silly, are good ideas. You'll find that all those squiggles will look like tropical birds, just with some tweaking. And so it helps really reinforce that point that all ideas are good ideas, and to not self-edit in the process. So you could do that icebreaker. There's many other icebreakers you could do. The aim is to just make everyone have a bit of fun, to feel safe and feel lighter. This mindset and this lightness will lead to much better ideas. I want to share now, you might share, but the 7 rules of brainstorming. This is a resource that is on the IDEO website, the design kit. And it's quite good. And if you could you might make a brief PowerPoint slide that talks about these, or you just might briefly share them as a way to encourage people to follow these sort of rules. The first one is to defer judgment. You don't want to have any critique of the idea phase during this ideation phase. You don't want anyone to be saying, oh, that's okay, but it wouldn't work because of this, or we tried that. Because even if it's true, it just stifles the whole creativity process, and people won't share their good ideas because they just worried that that person will critique it. The second is to encourage wild ideas. So even if someone thinks it's a bit too crazy, put it down because it might stretch the thinking of everyone else. And so really we want to see any ideas, boring, wild, exciting, ones that are unfeasible, that are too expensive, because it's going to just stretch everyone's thinking when they see it. Because they'll see, oh, they might think, oh, we can't do that, but maybe if we did it this way, it could work. Another one is build on the ideas of others. This really comes from the idea of improv, and they have this whole concept of yes and. So you're trying to build on each other's ideas. You're not holding your idea like it's the most precious thing in the world. It's not your idea. You're building ideas as a group. So somebody might have, one of your team members might have this great idea, and you'd say, yes, and we could add to it by doing this. Or what if we added this? Or how about we add this to it as well? Stay focused on topic. So always come back to the how might we question. Otherwise, it can get a bit unwieldy if you start saying, oh, well, why don't we just make this idea for international students? In this round of ideation, we're actually focusing on marketing of idea. And sometimes you have to be not quite firm, but you just need to remind your team to stick to what we agreed that we'd be focusing on for this brainstorming session. So it's really creativity in constraints. You want to have one conversation at a time. If all of a sudden, because people can get quite excited and you can have all these sideline conversations, and it's great, but it just means that not everyone is hearing these great ideas that people are having, all these great thoughts. What you can encourage your team to do is, if they have a thought while others are sharing, they can have their Sharpie and they can just write down their idea on a post-it note and just add it to the collection. So when we come to the methods, I can share more about that. Be visual, draw your ideas. And this actually, it's surprising. People are really hesitant to draw ideas. There's this real barrier there. People sort of think, oh, I'm not creative, or I'm not a drawer. And maybe there's some sort of shame, or at some point in their past they're told, oh, you're not creative. Well, that's a terrible picture. And so people really have this barrier around drawing. But there's a real benefit to drawing because it means that people will pick up the idea much quicker than having to read it. Go for quantity. So go for as many ideas as you possibly can. We always say quantity over quality. Don't spend the whole time trying to come up with the most perfect idea. Just get everything out. Even if you think it's bad, what you might think is bad will be genius to someone else. That's what one of my improv teachers used to say. What is boring for you and what seems really normal for you is genius to another player. So there's just some of the 7 rules of brainstorming. And there's resources about this on the internet. I'll put it in the show notes. It's just a helpful way to set up the ideation phase. Now, there's so many different methods for this section. There's methods for each of the stages of the double diamond. And you can mix and match and choose different ones depending on the problem that you're trying to solve, or ones that you've noticed worked better with the group that you're working with. There's all sorts of ways to do ideation. So one that works well is called brainwriting. This is where you give everyone a pile of post-it notes. You've gone through the research and data and you've reviewed the how might we question, so that's fresh in everyone's mind. And you say, okay, for the next 3 to 5 minutes, we're going to sit silently and we're going to try and come up with as many ideas as we possibly can. And everyone's going to write these ideas down on the post-it notes, ideally with a Sharpie or a very clear visual marker. No talking, and everyone's just trying to get as many out as possible. You might have some instrumental music or acoustic, non-vocal music in the background just to create a vibe. But the key here is not to talk. You want to get as many ideas, and you'll find that you'll get such a huge amount of ideas if you don't all do it at once. It's so counter to this idea of sitting in the boardroom, like I said earlier, and one person sharing the idea, the next person sharing the idea. By the end of something like that, you might just have 12 ideas. But if you've got 5 people, each coming up with 12 ideas, you've got 60 ideas at the end of this sort of thing, all within 7 minutes. Okay, so you've sat down, you've written out as many ideas. After the 5 minutes, you stand up and you share the ideas. And as you each individually share your ideas, you stick them on the board and slowly start to cluster similar ideas together. Now, you'll find there's a lot of standing in design thinking. And this is because it's great to have an action pose. standing, there's something different about the energy. I find this in my classes. When I ask my students to stand up and use a whiteboard, the volume and the tone of the room shifts. It's no longer this monotonous, boring conversation talking. People are actually laughing and sharing and moving, and as a result, the ideas that they generate are better. And so that's called brainwriting. Another activity is called Newsflash. This is great as well because while brainwriting might have some visual, often it ends up with lots of just writing, unless you really encourage or unless people are really comfortable drawing. Newsflash forces people to include an image. So you just grab an A4 sheet of paper, you split into 3 sections. The top is a long bar, like a headline of your newspaper. Then you put a line through the middle of the second section, make 2 more, and it's got a space for writing and a space for a sketch. This is a great way to quickly communicate the essence. So you have the headline, which is a title. You have an image showing what the idea is, and then you have a short, pithy sentence describing the idea. And this is great because everyone can quickly grasp what the idea is, and often it can lead to laughter because the visuals are funny, but they're clear. So that's Newsflash. Another one is called Crazy Eights. This is great if you are limited in your resources. You might not have any post-it notes. You grab a sheet of A4 paper and you get everyone to fold it in half a few times until you've got 8 pieces. I'll put a picture in the show notes in the Substack. And by folding it into 8 pieces, so half, and half, you'll have 8 spaces, little rectangles that people can draw and write on. And you can cut these up and then you can stick them on the whiteboard like you did with the first one. But the idea with Crazy Eights is have visuals and words as well. This next one is called Lotus Blossom, and this works really well with the first one I described with the post-it notes. In Lotus Blossom, you choose your strongest idea, and often this is one that you can do as a second round iteration of ideation. So you take the first idea, so you've done the brainwriting with the post-it notes, and you've all voted or evaluated and chosen 1 or 2 ideas. You put that one post-it note in the middle of a whole square of other post-it notes, and surrounding that post-it note, so like a flower, you've got the one post-it note in the middle, and then you've got multiple others, 9 other post-it notes surrounding it, and each of those have different prompts of how you might change this idea. So you might have questions like, what if this was digital? What if the idea was AI enhanced? What if it was a circular design model? What if it was sustainable? What if it was in person and no digital part? What if it's a service? You can think of lots of different prompts. And the great thing about this is lots of people have done this before, so there's lots of ideas of different ways you can do Lotus Blossom. What's nice about this is it stretches the thinking of the idea and further develops it. So these are just a few ideation methods, idea methods. There's lots. There's so many. And you'll find as you go through some that you prefer more than others. It's always good to try some new ones because you might discover that there's others that are quite good. Now that we've gone through the brainstorming ideation section, you're going to have lots of ideas. Lots of really good ideas, lots of really bad ideas, lots of wild ideas. You're just going to have lots of ideas, kind of like at the end of the discover phase where we have all this information, but it's a mess. So we need some ways to decide on which one you're going to focus on. So there's different ways you can do this. One is called dot voting. You might just give everyone 2 or 3 stickers, little dots, and they can look at the different ideas. Some of them will be clumped together and put a sticker next to the one they think is the best. And they have 2, so they might put 2 different ones. And at the end of this process, the idea that has the most stickers wins. You can also do this with a marker. So everyone just gets a whiteboard marker and they put a tick next to the one they like the most. This can also be done like that on Miro. You could do it with emojis or with the marker. And you just choose the one which is the most popular. Another way is to use the feasibility, desirability, viability matrix. So that means desirability, do people actually want this? Viability, can we sustain it? Can we afford it? Will it make money? And feasibility, can we actually make this happen? Do we have the skills and technology to do this? And so you can make a matrix where one axis is, say, desirability and one is feasibility. And you put all your post-it notes or visuals onto that matrix. Just make a massive matrix on a whiteboard and blue tack the ideas where they are on that matrix. So if they're really viable, like it's financial, you can actually pay for it and it will make money, but you don't think people want it, it'll be high in the viability part, but really low in the desirability part. But if you have ideas that fit, you think people really want it, it's something we can afford and will make money, it's going to be in the top right corner of that matrix, and that will be possibly a good idea. Once you've gone through that phase, you can then do it with a different set of values. So you might do desirability versus feasibility instead. And after doing a few rounds of this filtering system, you might come up with one idea that really fits the mold. Now, you don't need to just do those three. It could also be if it's ethical, it could be other features or other qualities that you think are really important for this idea. So safety might be important for the one we're working on with international students and accessing medical care. And so you've come through this process, you've now evaluated and you've chosen an idea. You might even choose a few ideas. That's okay. They might be related and you might be creating a system of solutions. It's not just one idea. It might be that, there's an idea around events, but also there could be something around the ticketing system, some sort of really clever idea. And that can connect because you might be creating a system or a service or whatnot. And there's different aspects of the idea. And so when we move towards this final phase, you want to have one idea. So just for the sake of having something to work with, we might say that the idea that the team came up with was that if you had events where there were, 3 times a year, one during open day where people can meet the health staff and see the facilities in a real low stakes way and build relationships with the health staff and the university staff, international students might feel safer and they'll have more knowledge about what is accessible, rather than being this building in the corner that no one knows about. This could be marketing in-person events, that where you provide food, pizza, everyone loves pizza, they come along, they meet the staff, they meet each other, a great way for them to connect with each other, and they learn more about the different services. This could be a really great way for people to find out about the information. And so that's just an idea. The next phase is called deliver, and this is where you start testing that idea, getting feedback, evaluating it, and actually building a minimal viable product. So we'll come to that next episode, the deliver phase. Yes, so I hope this has been helpful in understanding what is the develop phase of the Double Diamond entails. Hope you come back with some ideas of some methods that you can use, and I'll be sure to include a lot of resources in the Substack that you can access. All the best with your journey in the Double Diamond. All right, good luck. Thank you for listening to today's show. Make sure you subscribe to keep track of all the episodes, and I look forward to having you here again. Have a great day.